This video might be a little bit of a long one. I could probably break this into multiple topics, multiple videos, but it all kind of fits under the same umbrella, so I'm just going to talk about it in one. But buckle your seatbelts, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it won't be too crazy, but we'll see. So we're going to be talking about branding, and game recognizability, or really more game memorability, and increasing your exposure count consciously for your potential buyers. A lot of this is going to be revolving around the visuals, the style of your game, the characters in your game, but we're also going to talk about things like the name of your game, and what are a couple of the other ones here? Game name, mechanics. It's mostly going to be more about color, environment. It's a lot about the visuals, right? Because naturally, that's going to be most of what's going to make your game memorable. And we'll get into why you need, well, quick overview. The reason that you need a game to be memorable is because of exposure count. In marketing, exposure count is very important. The more times people see something, the more likely they are to buy it. Basic summary. But I also want to talk about a very clear distinction that needs to be made between art style, selling your game, and art style acting as branding, which will indirectly help your conversion rates. There is a very, very, very common misconception. I guess I'll just start out here with this. Basically, here's the deal. Art style is not going to sell your game. Not on a mass scale. Yes, sure, you can make $100,000 off of a very artistic game that, a walking sim, super artistic with, I don't know, a cool story. Yeah, you can make some money off of that. But again, on this channel, the goal is, how do we pull out all the stops? Okay, what is every single roadblock that is standing in the way from pushing a game further and giving a game as high a ceiling as possible? Okay, yes, you can make six figures off of an artistic game. But if you're trying to pull out all the stops, if you want to go as far as possible, you have to know that art style will not sell copies. Why is this? Well, if you want to appreciate the art style of a game, all you need to do is look at it. That's it. You can look at a screenshot. You can watch a YouTube video. You watch a trailer. You browse the Steam page. Boom. Now you've seen it. That's it. And for most people, that is fully sufficient. Okay? Most people, they don't care to pay $20 to see it for a little longer. Like, visuals are something that, and just aesthetics, artistic aesthetics. Artistic aesthetics are everywhere. Okay? Hell, even AI can make artistic aesthetics, right? They can mimic visually appealing things. Okay? Aesthetics are everywhere. Literally everywhere. You don't need to pay for aesthetics. And so because of that, there are very few people who actually do. So gameplay ultimately is what's going to sell, but repeat exposure to something with gameplay is very important. Getting into that, here's the deal. Most games look the same. Well, most unsuccessful games look the same. If you look at the big hit games, you'll see that they all look a little bit different. They've got some kind of unique brand to them. Generally, there are a handful of like the really, really mass appeal games that are realistic. Obviously, those ones are going to look kind of similar. But in general, like, okay, are you going to have any trouble confusing Fortnite and Minecraft? Probably not, okay? We can probably all tell the difference between those two games, and that's incredibly important. A lot of times, people are going to make games that just don't really look different at all. And so because of that, you run into this issue where even if, let's say, somebody sees your game on Monday and then they see your game again on Friday, they're going to be like, wow, there sure are a lot of people making these body cam horror games. They're not going to say, oh, hey, I saw that game on Monday. They're just going to be like, oh, another one. And then it's like, there's no inclination that like, oh, wow, this specific game is really popular. I should look into it more because I keep seeing it everywhere. So yeah, so repeat exposure. Basically, when marketing a product, The goal is that people see the product as much as possible. It's not just that everybody hears about it once, it's that everybody hears about it and sees it all over the place. The general number that I hear marketing people talk about is 7 exposures. I don't know why I put up 4 fingers, but you get the idea. Basically, the more that people see something, the more popular they'll assume it to be. And social proof is a really good way to increase conversions, right? If all your friends are talking about something, then there's a good chance you might like it too. If every single YouTuber is talking about it, there's a good chance that there's something interesting there. But the big thing with games is that you need to make sure that people are consciously aware that they're seeing the same game. If your game looks the same, like I mentioned, you see it one day and then you see it 2 weeks later and it looks like every other game, you're not even aware that you've seen this before. And that's a problem that a lot of games run into, and it's hurting their exposure count. All right, so now we're just going to start going through the list of kind of the key ways that you can better your branding. And also, as we're going through, I'm also going to mention a handful of, there's also going to be some mention of like how you can increase basically just the amount of attention that you're getting just by making stuff more eye-catching, I guess. But yeah, so we'll just go through this. Basically what I'm saying is not everything I'm going to be mentioning here is specific to branding. Some of this is just like, oh, hey, don't make a game that's overly dark because then nobody can see it and nobody's going to pay attention to it. But we'll just start in. So, visual style, your art style. This is probably the easiest way to have distinct branding and be recognizable is to have a unique, visually distinct art style. Now, again, that itself is not going to sell the game. People aren't going to see your art style and go, oh my gosh, I need to go pay for this right now. They won't. I promise they won't. It's like it's like, yes, there are some examples, but the level of quality that you have to hit for that to actually take effect is so high that it is way, 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 way more effective to just focus on your gameplay, focus on your virality, focus on your conversion rates, okay? Art is you're hitting diminishing returns so quickly. Basically, art style, it can communicate quality, right? If you have solid aesthetics, solid quality, then it communicates like, okay, this game is worth my time because it doesn't look like an asset flip or something. But it's really just going to get you in the door. With crappy art, you're probably not going to get considered as like a game people should buy at all. With decent art style, then people will at least take you seriously enough to consider your gameplay and the other mechanics and selling points that you have. Okay, so having a distinct art style. Best way to brand your game, because anything in your game, anything and everything, you take any screenshot, any video, and people will see that distinct art style. You know, ideally, kind of like I was saying, your style would be aesthetically pleasing, because if it's aesthetically pleasing, it's better, right? It's good. It's good to be aesthetically pleasing. But you can still have a distinct, well-branded game that's really recognizable that has, you know, like bad graphics. You know, like people talk a lot about how like, how come Minecraft did good if it looks so bad? It's like, well, it's recognizable. Like, you know, when you're looking at Minecraft, like, personally, I think Minecraft looks fine, especially these days. But, you know, like at the early like alpha versions, you know, it did look a little bit rough. But again, it was still very distinct. Undertale is another example, but again, it's one that is recognizable. More so, I think, because of the characters. I think the characters are what really make it recognizable, but that's going to be a topic that we talk about in a little bit here. So another thing that I think, just from a conversion standpoint, when it comes to visual style, that's important, is ideally your art style would age well. You know, if you're trying to compete on like graphics, which, I mean, at this point these days, Unreal Engine 5 and like ray tracing and all this stuff, pretty much anybody can compete on graphics. It's not the crazy task that it used to be. But ideally, you know, if you've got something stylized it's going to look stylized 5 years from now too. Like, it's not going to look worse. It won't have aged poorly. So that could be something that's worth taking into account. That could help the longevity of a game. Another point in relation to visual style is just how, like what are the light levels? Okay, the light levels in your game are very, very important. This sounds stupid, but it's so crucial, guys. This mostly applies to horror games, but it does apply to, there are other games that might mess up on this as well. In most of these like horror games that you see, you'll have like 80% of the screen will be just utter darkness, just like pitch black. And then you'll have like a dim flashlight illuminating like the center, like 20 or 15% of the screen. And you can't make out the environment. You can't make out any faces or characters. You're basically just looking at a black box that doesn't communicate anything about the game, okay? Other than, hey, it's dark. It's like, okay, cool. We're all dark. This is not special, okay? So you're basically just looking at a black box that doesn't communicate anything about the game. It doesn't show any gameplay. It doesn't show anything unique. It's not memorable. And it doesn't grab your attention either, right? If you've just got a black box, you can scroll past that without even realizing you saw it, right? It's just something out of the corner of your eye. You don't even see it. It doesn't pop out at you. Ideally, whatever style you're picking, it should be visible, right? It should be like, it should pop out at you. With some genres, that's going to be more difficult. This is a big reason why I'm not doing horror anymore. Why I'm doing Cuff Bust, since it's like this sort of bombastic co-op multiplayer. It's perfectly normal in a genre like that to have colorful graphics, okay? Colorful, bright graphics. In a horror game, it's not, that's when you get into mascot horror, and now that's been overdone, and now people hate that. So it's, again, depends on the genre, but that's why I chose, a big reason as to why I chose to not do horror anymore, among other things as well. It should have bright, detailed art across the entire screen. It should all be well contrasted. It should all be easily discernible. Because you also got to consider, a lot of people, they're not watching YouTube videos or scrolling Twitter on like a big fucking 4K screen in a nice dim room with their headphones on. It's like, no, they're on the bus, they're scrolling Twitter, there's glare on their screen. It's like everything is already more muted just to begin with. So if you're bright, well contrasted, then you're making use of every single person that sees your game, right? If you get the chance to be in front of somebody, you need to make sure you're making the most of that, because otherwise they didn't see it anyways, right? Yeah, the view count technically went up on YouTube, but they didn't comprehend what they were seeing. It doesn't even count. So that's kind of the basic stuff around just visuals and aesthetics, okay? Next thing, characters. Now, obviously, character design. And I mean, actually, all of these points are basically entire fields of study and careers in and of themselves. And I would highly recommend that you go and research all of them as extensively as you have time to. I'm kind of just making a handful of like the most sweeping observations that I think are most relevant in games. Okay, so characters. First of all, people have it. Okay, think about this. How many people out there watching this are going to have an easier time recognizing a face as opposed to remembering somebody's name, right? You're more likely to say, oh, I've seen you before, than I remember your name. Faces are they're more memorable. They just are. They also attract our attention. It's part of how we're wired. We look for faces, right? We look for pattern, any kind of pattern, anything. But faces are one of the most common patterns that we look for and that we try to identify. So if you're scrolling Twitter and you see a face, that's immediately going to pop out at you, and you're going to be more likely to stop and consider it and analyze it. Because of this, it is crucial, not just like, oh, it's good. It is crucial to have easily identifiable easily identifiable characters and mascots for your game. Branding has been doing mascots for ages. Okay, sports teams have mascots. The friggin' insurance companies have got a mascot. Okay, everybody's got a mascot because it works. It's like one of these just absolute cheat codes. So if you have characters that people can attach to, that people can recognize, then your product is going to become so much more memorable. So a handful of points that I think make sense when designing a character. Again, I'm sure you could do a 6-month deep dive and talk to researchers and read books and all kinds of stuff to figure out what makes a great character or mascot. But handful of main things that I take into consideration are that it is either animalistic or humanoid. Okay, animalistic or humanoid. It's like kind of like, I mean, if you've got a character but it's like a really weird, obscure thing, it's like it should have appendages. It should have a face. It should have a head. Ideally it should look like an animal or a human. Another litmus test I kind of like is that a character should be like simple and like easy to memorize or draw. Like if I showed a character to, let's say, an 8-year-old and I told them, hey, draw this character, would they be able to draw a character that looks similar enough? Like, oh yeah, like I can tell that it's the same thing. It should have unique attributes that aren't easily compared to existing characters. Also kind of just goes hand in hand with like, unique silhouettes. That's another very, very common tip when it comes to character design is like, okay, if you just blacked out the silhouette of the character, does it look identifiable? This is why, like, with the Cuff Bus Jailians, they've got notches cut in their ears. Because without the notches, a silhouette would just look like, I don't know, like Mickey Mouse or something. Like, it doesn't, but you put the notches in it, and then it makes it more distinct. It's these some unique little twists to make it recognizable. And then another one that I kind of like is that I think ideally your character should contrast well with the environment that they're in. So let's say you've got a water game, a water-based game. It's underwater, and most of the screen is blue all the time. If you have a blue character, a blue enemy character or something like that, then somebody posts a screenshot of that, you can't really see it as well. It doesn't pop out. It's not as, you can't comprehend it as effectively. So if you were to make it, let's say, I don't know, pink or red or white or something bright, something that contrasts well with the environment, I think that makes more sense because it's just, in more scenarios, when you are seeing it, it will make sense and be memorable. And then ultimately, it's like, how do you use the mascot? Like, where does it go? I think your mascot could basically be any character in your game. This could be your player character. This could be enemy characters. Like in Minecraft, you've got iconic characters like the Creeper, or you've got a lot of iconic character designs in Minecraft. You got your pigs and your sheep and your, I don't know, the villagers and like all this stuff. Or you got like Pikachu and Pokemon, right? So it's like, or even like, like the Among Us crewmates. Again, also, they're pretty iconic, right? They're simple, they contrast well. But it's, in that case, it's the player avatar. So it doesn't necessarily need to be any specific role within your game. It just needs to be there. It needs to be visible. And it needs to be something that you can put in the forefront of your branding, right? It's like maybe you're making like a first person game, and the character technically is a really cool design, but it's not shown in any of the branding because if the game is first person, you're seeing through their eyes and then you're not actually seeing the character ever. So then it's like, what's the point, right? It needs to be something that people see throughout the game. All right, next topic, the name of your game. This is an insane rabbit hole that I haven't gone very deep into, because this is one of these things where it's like, these are all such extensive topics that I would have to spend years to have like a solid understanding of this. So this is one of those things where I've got a handful of observations, kind of the basic 101 level stuff. But it goes deep. So basically, the name of your game, this is, when it comes to branding, I think this is one of the, it's kind of a tough one, right? Because a bad name is going to be, it's going to stick out in a bad way or not stick out. But a good name, again, I don't know how much that's, well, let's just talk about it. I think the main thing that you should be, I think there should be two main goals. Two main goals when you're naming your game. First thing, it should be easy to search for, right? So your Google results, your, it should be able, you should be able to trademark it. It should be available on social media platforms, like social media handles, right? So it's SEO optimized, right? It's available and easy to find, and it should be difficult to forget. Not easy to remember, difficult to forget, okay? It means basically the same thing, but I think difficult to forget, it gets the point across more, okay? First thing, when it comes to searchability and search engine optimization type stuff, main thing, you can't use overly common words, right? If you're working on, this is one of the examples I had written down, but again, I wrote all this stuff when I was like working on horror stuff, so it's a lot of it's horror centric. But you're working on a game and it's called The Haunted House in the Forest. Ooh, very spooky. That's going to be really difficult to search for. You've got haunted house, forest, and then the rest is just the, in, and the again. How the hell are you going to find any results for that? You're not, ultimately, right? Kind of getting into a longer list of like kind of specs that you might consider. Shorter names are going to be easier to remember, okay? Just keep it as short as possible while, utilizing as many of these other things as you can, and that's going to be better. Utilizing at least one word that's uncommon to hear in day-to-day conversation, or that's just made up, or like a combination of multiple words that is also easy to spell, is going to be good. So, with Choo Choo Charles, Choo Choo is not, you don't hear that every day, but everybody knows how to spell it. Similar kind of thing, cuff bust. Okay, cuff and bust. It's like those are both common, or everybody knows how to spell them, right? People know these words, but it's uncommon to hear them in day-to-day conversation. And so because of that, it's usually going to be easier to search for them. That's the other thing, right, with combining two words, is that immediately there's going to be less existing search results for that thing, because it's a new thing. It's a new word. It doesn't really exist. Obviously, when you do come up with a name, make sure to check Google, check other search engines, check social media, try and see if there are other existing search results. Obviously, you want to avoid, ideally, like pretty much anything, but you especially want to avoid other entertainment media. And this is something that I should have done more extensively when I was making Choo Choo Charles. With Choo Choo Charles, so okay, a lot of people think that it was inspired by the Stephen King stuff, Charlie the Choo Choo. I did do searches. I looked up Choo Choo Charles, or actually no, initially I think the name of the game was like Choo Choo Charlie, maybe. I think Charlie literally was the first Ch name that I thought of. Believe it or not, there's very few Ch names. So I was looking up like Choo Choo Charlie, and I was like, oh, there's some other thing. There's a kid's book called Charlie the Choo Choo, and I was like, I'll make it Charles. That's different enough, right? I didn't even realize that it was a Stephen King book. I just thought it was some random kid's book. I was like, nobody will try and connect the two. It's a different thing. But again, I should have looked into it a little bit more because it caused a lot of confusion. But as just a fun example of that one. Yeah, so definitely avoid books, movies, songs. There's a lot of different things that might come up as having similar names. Try to avoid as many of them as possible. Next one. Okay, I'll put a link to this in the description. Your name should not include any demonetized words on YouTube. When people on YouTube or Twitch are playing your game, they're going to put the name of the game somewhere in the description, in the title. If your name happens to have a blocked word in it, that's not going to go over well. Now, most games probably aren't going to have this, right? It's probably it's probably going to be uncommon, but you should perhaps make sure. Just a quick check. Again, most people are probably not going to be putting blacklisted words in their game's title, but you might as well double check. If you do have a multi-word title, if you're going for something slightly longer, then using alliterations is, again, that'll help it be more memorable. As well as implementing some kind of rhythm. Again, for these like slightly longer, again, ideally, I think you'd keep things as short as possible. But if you've got some kind of rhythm to like the syllables of the title and it flows well, almost like a chant or a song, then that's going to be better, right? It should be very easy to say. Rhyming as well for multi-word titles could be useful. And then the big area where like this really turns into a massive rabbit hole is phonetics. So basically there are certain sounds that are like pretty much universally across most languages and cultures that are perceived in certain ways and that are associated with certain things. Kind of just the way that like the human brain works. We associate certain smells to certain places. We associate certain colors or songs to different memories. And so by making use of things that we associate with certain other things, we can increase the strength of the branding. So by incorporating certain sounds into the title that help communicate certain aspects that are in line with the game and the tone of the game, then you can just be better branded. And like there are companies that'll charge hundreds of thousands of dollars to name products and brands, right? Like this, it's an extensive thing. And it's probably like getting that deep into it, probably like at this point, I don't think it's really going to make the biggest difference, but it is an interesting thing that you could consider looking into. The other big things are that the name should be easy to pronounce and easy to spell. So if somebody hears the name, people should be able to spell it, right? Because let's say somebody tells their friend, yo, I just saw this crazy game called fill in the blank. If that friend goes, oh yeah, I'll look that up. But they're trying to spell it and they're like, I don't know how to spell this, and then no search results come out. You just lost a sale, maybe, right? Or you made that process more difficult. Again, we're trying to pull out all the stops. So, easy to spell upon simply hearing the title, and then easy to pronounce. So if you just see the title, you see it written, you should be able to look at that and go, oh, that says Cuff Bust. Oh, that says Choo Choo Charles. Oftentimes there are games where it's like different people pronounce it in different ways, and it causes confusion. It adds friction to the whole branding process. Keep it smooth. That's my main stuff around game names. Again, a lot of additional stuff that you could look into there, but those are the main things that I'm taking into account. Unique mechanics. Unique mechanics is the next topic, and this is going to be a quick one because this is something that we basically talk about in other videos much more extensively. The mechanics in your game can play a big part in the branding. Okay, if you've got unique mechanics, like if I was to explain the mechanic of shooting at a spider train off the back of another train, it's going to be difficult to confuse that with any other game, right? So it acts as a form of memorability and branding. That's something that obviously you should be implementing anyways if you're following any of this advice. Next off is color. Color is it's one of these ones where it's a very extensive topic. We've probably all heard about, some of the ways that brands and companies use color to evoke certain emotions, or how like red and yellow make you hungry. So that's why like McDonald's uses them on their logo and stuff like that. And again, this is kind of going back to association. We associate certain colors with certain other traits, with emotions, with different qualities. And so by creating a color palette for your game that is kind of helping to evoke the correct image, the correct emotions in people, it can help create just again a more cohesive overall brand image for the game. So, for Cuff Bust, my main color palette is blue and orange. Those are the two key colors, and then I've also added green. So even the shade of blue specifically that I'm going for is a social tone. It's associated with social interaction and kind of calm and like, again, because it's a co-op game. And then orange, which also happens to work out really well because it's a prison game, so the orange jumpsuit, it's everywhere in the game, and the default Jailians are blue, right? So again, this is associated throughout the game constantly. The specific, kind of shade of orange that I'm using is kind of more associated with with like adventure and energy. And then the shade of green, I've been kind of going back and forth on it, and I think I'm going to probably change it. Originally, I think I had a tone that was more, I don't really know what it was, but I'm kind of considering changing it to one that is, again, also more in the adventurous, kind of colorful, bombastic, energetic kind of sphere. Because it's just when I'm playing the game with that color tone, it just feels better. It looks better aesthetically with the other colors that I have, and so that's something I've been considering. Also, I will put a link to a couple of articles on color psychology and some stuff that you could take a look at there. But again, very extensive topic, and it's something that you could probably research for the next 6 months if you wanted to. But ultimately, my goal is to use colors that are, again, aesthetically pleasing and that help to try and communicate something about the tone of the game. It just makes the whole package more cohesive and more memorable. All right, and then the last topic here is environment. So this is kind of similar, sort of similar, to having a unique art style in your game. But having a unique environment that your game takes place in is also massive for branding. A lot of games are recognizable based on nothing other than the environment that they take place in. If I was to say to you, like, oh, hey, you know that game that it's like an underwater game on an alien planet? And you would know, like, oh, you're talking about Subnautica, right? Like, I don't think anybody watching this, if you know what Subnautica is, would have been like, oh, wait, no, I think it was that other one, because there isn't another one. I mean, maybe there is by now. Maybe there's some ripoffs. If you've got a game that takes place in a sci-fi spaceship, like, how am I going to tell my friend about that? It's like, oh, hey, bro, I saw this really cool game. It's like a shooter game, and there's like aliens, and you're on a spaceship, bro. It's like, yeah. And he's which one? Which one are you talking? There's a million of those. Okay, so that's not going to help you be recognizable if you're using a generic environment. Ideally, the environment that your game takes place in should be as underutilized as possible. Now, I should also mention that it's possible to have an environment that's unique on paper but doesn't actually visually look unique. So, like, let's say you've got a game and it's like, oh, my game takes place in an abandoned car factory. It's like, okay, but does it look like any other random abandoned apocalyptic building? Because if it just looks like an abandoned building, again, there's so many games that take place in an apocalyptic city or in a forest or in whatever it might be. If it looks similar to those environments, even if it's unique on paper, right? Oh, abandoned car factory. I've never played a game in an abandoned car factory before. It's like, okay, sure, but it looks the same. And again, we're talking about branding. It's like, okay, when I look at this, am I going to remember it? Is this distinct? There's also a big aspect here in conversion rates. If your game takes place in, again, like let's say in a forest, everybody's explored a forest in a video game. There's nothing intriguing about taking part in that world. Okay? What's special about this forest that doesn't exist in any other survival crafting game? Okay? I don't want to walk around in another forest. I've done it a million times. It's not special. You know, this was a big failing on the part of Choo Choo Charles, right? The environment for Choo Choo Charles was not as interesting as it could have been. It would have been a lot better, for example, if it took place in, like, if there were more train stations, just all over the place, right? And there were like cool like hub areas where it was like subways and like train tunnels, and like I could have done a lot more interesting stuff with the Choo Choo Charles environment. Instead, I put it on an island in a forest. You know, ultimately the other branding aspects were able to carry it far enough that it did just fine, but it absolutely could have been leagues better. You know, with Cuff Bust taking place in a prison, prisons, again, there are games that have prison segments, and there are games that have prison elements. You know, I mean, you got like a prison architect and stuff. But again, in like a scenario like that, it's 2D. It's a bit different, and it is less utilized than these more common environments like forests or abandoned buildings or all this other random stuff. It's in a better position. Not perfect. It's not a one of one. You know, if somebody said, "Hey, you know that new that prison game," there could be some confusion. So there is room for improvement. Obviously, I would have to change the game entirely if I was to improve it, but like as a future game thing. But again, it's better than, hey, you know that game in the forest? An environment that looks interesting to explore, that's at least not in a forest or an abandoned building. I've mentioned that so many times because people keep on doing it. Just stop doing it, okay? That is branding. That is video game branding. Again, kind of just scratching the surface. You know, the visual style one, fairly comprehensive. Characters, but yeah, no, I mean, a lot of this stuff, again, like I mentioned, you could look into this stuff very extensively, but at the very least, having a general understanding of it is going to put you way, 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 way ahead of most developers, because most developers are not thinking about this at all. So if you've even got a 101 level understanding of it, you're already so far ahead because nobody else is even playing this game. Yeah, that's basically it. I guess one other thing that I didn't mention before is how this multiplier kind of affects attention and action. Again, this is sort of more of a blanket topic that kind of encompasses a bunch of things, like, you know, for example, environment there. The environment, that could hugely increase your action rate, because just a unique environment alone, that could make somebody like, oh, I need to explore that world. I need to see what kind of mechanics and environments are in that place, because that is a place that I have not been before. But other ones like the game name, like somebody probably isn't going to hear your game name and be like, oh, wow, bro, I gotta play that. Like, no, probably not. So it depends on the topic. Some of these are going to be bigger for the amount of attention. You know, for example, visual style, you know, having a bright, well-contrasted, colorful style. Characters, that's going to help you hugely, especially in like probably in the next video or sometime soon, we're going to be talking about mass content ability and basically getting really, really deep into virality and like having characters. So big for virality. So yeah, this one I can't really quantify like a specific like percentage, like how much this overall topic contributes to each, but basically contributes to your attention and it contributes to your action rate. But that's about it.